Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Cielle Heiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we'll be talking about secondary progressions and how to interpret them in an astrological birth chart. So secondary progressions are an incredible timing technique that can give you really potent information about how you change and grow and evolve over time. The concept is a day for a year. And so the idea is that the first 90 days of your life say something about how the hopefully 90 years of your life will play out. So, your birthday, where the planets are on your birthday when you're born says something about your first full year of life. And then when you turn 1, where the planets were the day after you were born says something about that year. So, I'm 28. So the 28th day of my life back in 1995, I can go back and I can look at an ephemeris and I can see where the planets were on that day. And that will tell me something about how I have now grown and changed, and how, while our birth chart, our natal birth chart is always the anchor, like that never goes away. That's, we are a talisman for the energy. Like the first breath we take when we're born says something about how our life will unfold. The progressions add this kind of modulated layer on top of our birth chart that can show how we change as we grow. And they really speak to our internal experiences. So transits or other timing things can really talk about external things happening to us, whereas progressions tend to be more of an internal felt sense thing that you experience.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that real quick. I've had a lot of people ask what are well, first of all, what are progress charts? Like how do you use them? And of course, so many people come up and say am I my chart my whole life? Right? Like I get that argument, that question a lot. And it's like, yes, you are. You are your chart. You have this story that plays out and you have transit. You have a lot of different ways to interpret and look at your chart and use your chart. But progress charts do a really good job of explaining who you're becoming and what that story is progressing into, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even with our natal charts, yes, we are our charts, we live them our whole lives, but they're archetypal. And there's so many
Right.
different ways that archetypes show up. So, like my Scorpio sun and what my Scorpio sun was doing when I was 15 might be a different story than what I'm doing when I'm 50, even though it'll both be reflective of the archetypes and like mythology of having a sun in Scorpio.
Right. And we have our whole life to play out our chart.
Mm-hmm.
So not every piece of our chart is being played out every day or every moment
Mm-hmm.
of our life. And I also like to bring in the argument of twins when this conversation comes up too, because so many twins are not very alike, but have the same chart, right? And so I like to think that there's almost like a subconscious or unconscious, splitting of the chart. Like, I'll take this half, you take that half, or I'll take this personality, you take that personality. There's almost this splitting of it. So there's so many different ways that you can be your chart.
Mm-hmm.
And you have your whole entire lifetime to be that chart. So there is no pressure to live it out. But progress charts are so interesting because they can almost zoom in on a right now.
Mm-hmm.
What you can be
Absolutely.
focused on. Yeah.
And, the day for a year concept, it's an ancient concept. You can find it in the Bible. So it
Yeah.
is just like the idea that you can take a smaller chunk of time and blow it up into a bigger chunk of time, and it has
Yeah.
significance. So that's kind of the philosophical underpinnings of
Yeah.
progressions. But we'll start with just giving you a little bit of a technical guidance on how you can determine what is going on with progressions in your chart. And so one thing you can do I'll go ahead and share my screen, is you can look at an ephemeris. And so you can look up the Swiss ephemeris online, or also, like, this is your sign to go buy an ephemeris. They're amazing. They're incredibly useful. We'll have a link in the show notes for like what ephemeris I use, what ephemeris might be useful to look into getting, but they can be kind of scary with all this data, but they're incredibly useful.
Yeah.
And so I Googled 2024 ephemeris. That's what came up. And again, the astro.com Swiss ephemeris is the one that I use that has good, useful data. And so what the ephemeris is showing you
And
is,
it's free too. I just want to
it's
point out,
free.
like, buying one
Yes.
is great, and you should absolutely do that if you want it, where you can hold it. But the astro.com one is great.
Yeah. The only difference is astro.com, it'll just come up in years. So if I'm like, oh, what was going on a week ago in December, then I have to look up the 2023 ephemeris. Whereas
Sure.
if I'm in the book and it's physical, then I can page through. So it's really whatever
Right.
works well for you. But working with an ephemeris, if you're getting more into astrology, is a really good way to kind of up your astrological ability. And so when you look at an ephemeris, right, you have the day. So if I'm like, today's January 3rd, and so then I can go over and using the glyphs, I can see that, the sun is at 12 degrees Capricorn, the moon. Also, the ephemeris is for I don't know, it's like the meridian time through London, right? So actually for us, the moon is now in Libra because we're like 8 or 9 hours behind what London's time is. But, you can see that it was in Virgo at the beginning of the day in the like 0 GMT time zone. I don't fully
Yeah.
understand how
It's
time
like
zones work.
midnight. Yeah.
Yeah, midnight in London. But then you can see,
Well, you
Mercury's in
can
Sag.
you can set it to be your time zone, I thought.
Okay. I don't know. This is just like a PDF.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I'm like
if
99% sure you can go into the settings and make it either noon or midnight of your time zone where you're at.
okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use the ephemeris to go all the way through and see, like, oh, Uranus is in Taurus, right? Neptune's in Pisces, and you can see where the planets are and where they're going as you scroll through. Like, oh, Neptune will still be in Pisces next month, but the moon, the sun will be in Aquarius. And so, like, let's say you were born today and you're really smart. So you're already trying to figure out your progressions. And so you're like, okay, my
Brilliant.
birthday is January 3rd, 2024. And I want to know what my progressions are going to be like when I'm 5 years old. So then you would just go 5 days forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so then your progressions for your 5th year of life are then reflective of your 5th day of life. So you can see, oh, your progressed sun is still in Capricorn, but now your progressed moon has moved into Sag, even though it was in, Virgo or Libra when you were born. And your progressed Mercury is still in Sag, and you can go through and you can see how things progress and change. And so, like, for me, I would pull up a 1995 ephemeris and I would literally just count 28 days after my birthday, including your birthday as the first day and the first year. And
Yeah.
then that tells me, like, really fun for me, my progressed Mars just moved into Capricorn, and I can see that happened 28 days after I was born by transit. So
Yeah.
that is one way to find your progressions.
Um, I do want to say while you're doing that and counting down the days, it's really important to look for things that are retrograde, things that go direct,
Mm-hmm.
and the day that all of those things happen. Because those are going to be important years in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And also looking at the day that certain planets change. So, um, let's say we were born today,
Mm-hmm.
and this is our birthday. Um, I see that Mars, yeah, moved into Capricorn when this person is 2 years old. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, 2 years old. And so, when this person is two, something might change with their Mars or in a Mars way. Um, Anything going retrograde is or direct is really going to affect them too. Jupiter went retrograde for me when I was 3 days old. So when I was 3 years old, um, my family, so Jupiter for me is in Libra in my fourth house of home and family and roots. When I was 3, my brother was born and we moved back to Cincinnati so my mom could be closer to family because my dad was traveling. And so my whole life got uprooted back to, not back, I wasn't born here, but I'm currently living in Cincinnati and I have since I was 3 years old, um, to be closer to family so that my parents weren't alone where I was from. So yeah, like that's a great example of
Mm-hmm.
like me being 3 years old and my fourth house changed.
Yeah,
And
that's a
you can
great
do that
example.
with any, yeah, you can do that with any planet. You can do that with anything that goes direct or retrograde. Um, I had Mars go direct when I was about 10, and I'm pretty sure that's when I started doing like hip hop dancing. That's like what I ended up teaching. So I think that's when I started that form of dance. Um, and I had Pluto just go retrograde this year, in my chart. So
Mm. Yeah,
yeah.
those are great examples.
Hmm.
And one thing I'll say about an ephemeris, because it can also be really confusing, is when a planet changes signs. So let's say like Mars, right now while we're recording this, Mars is still in Sagittarius, but Mars will be
Yeah.
entering Capricorn soon. If you're trying to figure out what day Mars will enter Capricorn, it's actually the day
The day before.
before the glyph shows up, because this, on Friday, January 5th, 2024, it says Mars is in Capricorn at the start of that day,
Yeah.
according to
At
London
midnight.
GMT time. And so that means that Mars actually moved into Capricorn, or is
At
moving into
some point the
Capricorn
night before.
tomorrow, Thursday, the 4th. So that's an important nuance of how to read an ephemeris. Um, and then just
Yeah, and
another,
always keep that in mind when you're doing the math, that it's
yeah,
probably one day before.
totally. And then if you want to get more specific, or like you're just like, this is way too much data, I don't want to work in an ephemeris, you can also go to astro.com, which is free. And, you go into your user profile and you can click on whatever chart you're trying to pull. And then under extended chart selection, you can, create the chart drawing of your choice. And then under chart type, you just scroll down to progressions and you click on progress chart. And then you can choose, like what are my progressions for today, or what are my progressions for, next year. You can choose whatever date you want. And then you hit show the chart, and then it will come up and it'll say, oh, those are your progressions for, this day. And it'll show you kind of where the planets have progressed based off of what the natal chart data was. And so that's another way that you can pull progressions as well. That's free and pretty easy online.
Yeah, yeah. And the only thing is that if you're looking for timing, so like the my Jupiter story, Jupiter going retrograde in my chart happening when I was 3, that's a lot of clicking if you're doing it with the chart pull. So pulling a chart like that is really great if you're looking for where your progress chart is right now, or like, when the day that I met a specific person, or maybe the day you met your partner or something, if it was a couple years ago and you want to look back on it, you can absolutely set certain dates into that to see what the progressions were that day. Um, but they're gonna almost give you different information.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, playing around with them. And if you have a paid subscription, there's probably even fancier ways to pull progressions.
Yeah.
I don't pay for software, so can't help you there. Um, but yeah, and then getting back to what Lori was just sharing about kind of, well, how do you interpret progressions? Like,
Yeah.
when are they important? Because progressions move really slowly, right? Like the sun spends about 30 days in a sign. And so your progressed sun will spend about 30 years per sign. And so it's only every 30 years that you have your progressed sun changing signs. And so a lot of times when you're looking at your progressions, like a lot of planets might not have anything going on because progressions are so slow moving. But then when something is happening, it's really potent and it speaks a lot. And then also because progressions are so slow moving, and I was taught this by Kelly Surtees, who's the queen of progressions. I love what she does with progressions, but working with the faster planets is going to give you more interpretive info. So if you're looking at your progressed Uranus or even your progressed Saturn, my progressed Saturn is still at the same point in the sky it was when I was born. And my Saturn natally was retrograde. And I can look at when my progressed Saturn stationed direct, and I can see how some things related to the houses in my chart, Saturn rules, changed and got a bit more like momentum now that my Saturn's direct. But other than like my Saturn stationing, like my progressed Saturn has not even moved a degree in the sky. It has not changed. And that's part of the interpretive understanding of Saturn, is that she's a really slow moving planet. She doesn't change. So like things ruled by Saturn tend to have that more staying power. But, you know, when you're looking at your progressed moon, that's changing signs every 2 to 3 years. And we're going to do a whole episode on the progressed moon. But you can get a lot more potent interpretive information when you're looking at the faster moving planets because they're changing signs more frequently.
Yeah. And, you know, if you're looking at every day and it takes 28 days for a moon cycle, it takes 28 days for a sun cycle as well. Or like
30 days.
30 days.
Basically the same length.
Basically the same thing. So when you look at the sun, every 30 years, your sun is going to change signs. So if you were born with a 0-degree sun in whatever sign, when you're 30 years old, your sun is going to change into the sign after it.
And another question that can be really common is, can you look at progressed angles? And the answer is yes. And looking at when your progressed ascendant and descendant axis change signs, that's huge. And one thing with progressions too, and same with the MC-IC axis, like looking at your angles and how they move by progression will give you great interpretive info. And with progressions, unless the planet retrogrades back into the sign where it was, that progression is permanent. And especially with angles, like when your progressed ascendant changes signs, that's a permanent change. And that means your progressed descendant is changing signs. And like that, you know, if you're in a relationship and now you have completely changed what your relationship needs are, like that may or may not shift with your partner. Like that can signify like really major changes in yourself and relationships that are not going back. This is like this, you know, and it's again modulated on top of your natal chart. So your natal chart still matters, but it's this additional flavor of, oh, now that I've lived this much of my life, I've grown this much, I am different. And that is what progressions speak to, is those permanent changes in our lives.
Yeah, and my MC actually changed a couple months ago into Taurus. And my work structure was working a lot of fitness classes and parties. When my MC was in Aries. And I was working a ton of parties. I read tarot too, and I loved to work the fun parties that went all night, and I would get to do readings for everyone at the party. They made good money. They were really fun. But then my progressed MC moved into Taurus, and I was like, I don't like losing my voice at a party, and I don't want to go anymore. And
like, so your throat too,
my
with
throat
the Taurus
hurt.
medical astrology.
I know. It was so literal. And I actually started losing my voice every time I worked these parties too. Which like happened a little at the beginning because I have damaged vocal cords and lose my voice all the time. But it like became a problem when I moved into Taurus. And I just started sitting down with a lot of my business model and just, you know, I was getting a lot of gigs. I was getting a lot of work, and I just no longer really want to do that work. So sometimes you notice a shift like that because it felt really drastic when it changed for me. And so I started just thinking, okay, how can I have a little more stability in my work? And, you know, I'm not ready to give up the parties because they're fun. I don't want to like fully pivot my whole life, but I don't want to do this every weekend anymore. So just like finding that stability and then working with that MC. And this is one of those places where like you're going to change regardless. You're going to feel a shift, but understanding the language of astrology behind it, for me at least, has been so helpful to be able to say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, like, well, this is why I'm feeling this way.
Mm-hmm. And
And here's something
interpretively,
tangible. Yeah.
interpretively, some of the ways we can look at that, when any of your, so first of all, when you're
Mhm.
looking at progressions, when an angle or planet changes signs by progression, that's a big deal, right? Like sometimes you look at your progressions, nothing's changed, there's not much going on. But sometimes you look at your progressions and you're like, oh, my MC just moved into this sign and now my career is shifting.
Yeah.
And some of the ways you can interpret that is you can look at like, what is the element now, right? Like Lori and I both actually have
Mhm.
had this because my progressed MC recently moved into Virgo a few years ago. And that's when I started studying herbalism. And so, having both of our progressed MCs move from a fire sign to an earth sign, right? What's that energetic difference, right? Do you want things to be more stable, more tangible, more practical, more of this world? Whereas fire sign MC would be a lot more active and passionate and like, what am I doing? And like, what actions am I taking? So you can look at
Yeah.
how that element may change, and you can also look at the modality, right? Is it moving into a cardinal sign, which is a lot more
Right.
initiatory, and we just talked about that in our New Year's episode, explaining
Mhm.
why cardinal signs are like that, so you can go back
Yeah.
and listen to that. Or is it moving into a mutable sign and now things are becoming more meandering, or maybe my progressed whatever is moving into a fixed sign and now I want more stability? And so looking at the modality and the
Yeah.
element of the zodiac sign can give you really, and also what planet is now ruling that. If my progressed
Yeah.
MC is now ruled by Mercury rather than the sun, what does that say
Right.
about the way I approach my career and how that differs? And so those are some of the like
Yeah.
really tangible interpretive principles you can use to make sense when progressions change.
Yeah.
You can also book astrology readings and we will help you work through that.
True. It is a lot. Well, and you can also look at how your progress chart looks in almost like a bi-wheel or a synastry wheel with your
Mm,
chart too.
mhm,
Because my MC is in Pisces regularly in my ninth house, but then having my MC move into Taurus, that's my 11th house. So even though it's not my 11th house in my progress chart, it's my 11th house in my chart, in my natal chart. So I just had that whole um period of almost 30 years, I guess, of having my MC be in Aries, which is my natal 10th house, which is my chart ruler, which is my moon. Like there's so much there. But then when it moved into Taurus, like just like you were saying, that's a perfect example. It's a fixed sign. It wants a little more stability and security. It's fixed earth, right? You put earth in a box, it's never moving again. Like it needs that
it's
security.
comfy. Like it
It's
wants to be
comfy. It,
comfy.
it wants to eat. It wants to vibe. It wants to host. It wants to be in a space. And so I'm just finding that things that feel really important to me right now were not things that were important to me last year or
Hmm. Hmm.
really the past 30 years or so in general. Not
Hmm.
quite 30 years, but almost. And so yeah, it's a really big shift and you're gonna feel it when it shifts. And my 11th house is Taurus anyway. So once that moves over, you can start to feel more of that like friendship,
Hmm.
community, groups. Like I want to work with people instead of just working to make money or just working on my building my career and building who I am. Now there's like an emphasis on the people in my life
Hmm.
too, because Taurus is natally my 11th house. So, um, does all that make sense?
Yeah, that
Did I?
makes such good sense. That was
Okay.
very well said. Yeah,
Good,
we
good.
keep saying this because we're recording a bunch of episodes, but Mercury is in Sag right now. So we're just
Yeah.
like powering through. But
I
no,
know
that
the
all makes
rants that
sense.
get triggered by other rants.
But the house placement of progressions can be another interpretive piece. And one thing that Kelly
Mhm.
teaches in her classes is the second progressed sign change. So Lori's a great example, right? Your natal MC is in Pisces, and now
Mm-hmm.
your progressed MC has changed 2 signs to where it's now in Taurus. So that
Yeah.
second progressed sign change can bring more cohesion into our lives, because now
Right.
Taurus and Pisces sextile each other and they
Right.
have more cohesion, whereas Aries and Pisces don't see each other. And so when you have that
Mm-hmm.
second progressed sign change with any of your progressions, that can be another thing to look for. And yes,
Yeah,
absolutely,
that's
bringing it
huge.
back to the natal chart, like, are there contradictions between how my
Mm-hmm.
progressions are compared to my natal chart? Is there more cohesion and harmony? That can help give you more of an understanding of like what you're feeling in your life.
Yeah. Yeah,
um so
exactly.
yeah, looking for progressed planets changing signs, big deal. And yeah, confirm if it's a planet that goes retrograde, confirm that it won't retrograde back into the sign that it was in. But if it doesn't do that, then this is a permanent change. Like that, here you are. It's a complete
Yeah.
recalibration. And it's also, you know, like I'm having this right now because my progressed Mars just changed signs 2 months ago. Like for a while, like even a couple years around a progressed planet changing signs can be kind of this like disorienting, confusing, like you're recalibrating and you're trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out the new energy. So it's like you might not immediately feel like, oh, I have this exalted Mars now. You know, it's like you have to
Yeah.
kind of ease into it because, again, progressions
Yeah.
are slow moving.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I think my MC changed in like April or May of this year, um, or of last year. It's been that's changed. It's January. Um, so when you look at that, I mean, that was already close to a year ago, and it still feels really disorienting, and you start to feel
Mhm.
it as it's
Absolutely.
entering that space. So, it's never going to be like an overnight shift. And I mean, like my Jupiter story almost was, it was one of those things where my mom really wanted to be back in Cincinnati for years. Um, but sometimes you finally just have a moment of like, okay, we're just doing this. We're just moving. We're just going. We're just doing it. And sometimes it is really just that simple. But something like an MC change tends to be like that's your public image. That's what you're seen as. It's what you're known for, what your career is. So that shift can be a little bit more slow paced, and like you have to have that initial moment of like, oh wait, I don't want to be here anymore. What does that mean? Who am I now? Like
Mhm.
there's almost like an ego death that comes with MC or like sun progressions and stuff like that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so looking at progressed planets and points changing signs are really potent. And then also looking if any of your progressed planets station direct or station
Yeah.
retrograde through your life is another thing to look for. Almost all of us, if we're lucky enough to live long enough, will have our progressed Mercury change directions because
Yeah.
of Mercury's cycle, unless you were born, like I was born right after Mercury station direct. So my progressed Mercury will station retrograde when I'm like 80 or something like that. But looking at when progressed planets change directions can give you really important interpretive information. And
Yeah.
with that, especially looking at the speed, because when a planet is changing directions, whether it's going direct or retrograde, like you think of like a bowling ball, right? And planets are way bigger than bowling balls. Like it's a lot of weight. So they have to stop moving for a while before they can change. And so if you have a progressed planet that is stationing in your chart, that can be a period of time in your life where the topics that planet is in charge of might feel kind of stagnant or like things aren't
Yeah.
changing or moving. And with that, also, just to like bring in like ancient, like Hellenistic astrology is what I practice. And the core of
Mm-hmm.
Hellenistic astrology in a lot of ways is looking at what signs the planets rule. So if I'm looking at like my progressed Mars just changed sign, and I'm a Libra rising. So Mars is in charge of my second house of money and possessions and my seventh house of relationships. And so then if I'm like trying to make sense of what it means that my progressed Mars has changed signs, I can expect to see changes related to my second house and seventh house topics, because those are the topics that Mars is in charge of. If your progressed planet is stationing and is not moving, then you might be experiencing a little more stagnancy, or things aren't moving related to the topics that that planet is in charge of. And using traditional planetary rulerships with this technique, because it is from a Hellenistic perspective. So Mars rules Scorpio, Jupiter rules Pisces, and Saturn rules Aquarius for this technique specifically. But looking at the station points can be really helpful.
We should do an episode on modern astrology versus Hellenistic astrology as well, because there's so much to be said about the differences between the two. But that's a huge point, is if you're going to use these Hellenistic techniques, especially the timing techniques, you have to use Hellenistic rules.
And just use the system that the system was developed in.
Because they weren't built for a lot of the modern astrology changes.
And to clarify, progressions are not a Hellenistic technique. They were popularized in the 1600s by Placidus. But for me, as a Hellenistic astrologer, how I make sense of my progressed planets is always looking at what topics they're in charge of through house rulership. And that house rulership is the Hellenistic technique. So just for that clarity as well.
Yeah. Goes for any technique that was created for anything.
Exactly. Use it in the, and then, if you get to know the technique and the system really, really well, then you can go and experiment with it, but use it within the system it was developed first to get like a grounding with it. And then just some interpretive ways to look at whether if you have a progressed planet that's stationing retrograde, that might mean that the topics that planet's in charge of might become a little more internal. There might be some blockages and inhibitions related to that topic, especially at for the years where the planet is stationing and is literally not moving. And then I always like to just use words that start with re when I think of retrograde. So like you're reviewing, you're revising, you're reflecting. And so if you have a progressed planet that is now retrograde, it becomes this more kind of internal like review, reflect process. Whereas if a progressed planet is stationing direct, then it becomes more of kind of an external, like you're able to move forward out in the world a bit more. So that's how you can interpret that. And then the last thing, so, looking at when progressed planets change signs, progressed planets and points, and then when progressed planets station retrograde, the last thing to look at is when progressed points and planets make aspects back to your natal chart. So my progressed sun will be conjoining my natal Mars next year. And so that will be a big point for me, or like my progressed Mercury is squaring my natal moon. And so looking at how your progressed chart, like Lori had said, the synastry bi-wheel between them of how is the chart aspecting your natal chart and activating it through the progressed points and planets coming through, those can be years where those topics are really activated. Again, looking at like if my progressed sun is meeting up with my progressed Mars, then I'm looking at the houses that my Mars and Sun rule in my chart. And, using the Chaldean order, which is the order of the planetary speeds. So, you have Saturn is the slowest planet, then Jupiter, then Mars, then the Sun, then you have Venus, Mercury, and the Moon is the fastest moving planet. So the slower moving planets are going to influence the faster moving planets. So like if your progressed moon is conjoining your natal Saturn, Saturn is the one who is bringing the vibes and the moon is having to deal with it, right? For like the Mars Sun example, that's a little more gray because they're right next to each other. But technically, it'll be Mars influencing my Sun more than my Sun influencing my Mars. And then I'm excited to go actually experience that in life and see if the technique and the theory plays true, right? Because this is just a theory and like theory and life are different. But looking at when your progressed planets aspect your natal chart and understanding like who's influencing who can be another way to work with progressions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
anything else to say about progressions, Lori?
I guess if I was gonna add anything else to it, besides the moon phases, which we're gonna do
Mhm.
a whole other episode on, um, you can use aspects and aspect theory as well,
Totally.
just to see what's going on. Because as those things shift, sometimes the aspects that are in your natal chart change also. But
Totally. Like, yeah, like my progressed
otherwise, yeah.
Mercury squaring my natal moon
Right.
is, an important thing to happen. But connecting the progressed
Yeah.
chart to the natal chart, like I'm not looking at my chart and
Yes.
seeing, oh, my progressed whatever is conjunct my progressed whatever. I'm looking back to the natal chart. So
Right.
always grounding it to the natal chart, at least in how I've been taught, experiment, work
Mhm.
with what you're curious with, but
Yeah, I use both a little bit, because I will use the progress chart as like its own chart a little bit too. Um, but I mostly use the biwheel. So I think it's just really whatever feels right.
mhm. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
um, just to conclude, I don't have a lot going on right now because it's winter and I'm trying to just like take some rest and ski and play and frolic. So my books are not open right now, but I do have a newsletter. So if anyone would like to get like monthly astrological and herbal lore, be notified when my bookings do open. I offer astrology readings, I make astrologically personalized herbal teas, I do herbal consults as well. So you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter if you'd like just like fun writing and information and discounts and to be notified of when my books do open. And do you have anything going on right now, Lori?
Yeah, I'm also taking a little bit of a season of winter, but I am gonna have a fun Valentine's deal that I will start advertising for soon. Um, and I do take on like more of a full-time one-on-one client um situation. And so if anybody is interested in working with me one-on-one, I was looking to add 2 to 3 more people for my 3 to 6 month program, 3 or 6 month programs, starting in January. So I have room for 2 to 3 more people to add to that. So if anybody was interested in using that as like either an alternative therapy or just to learn astrology or just to get answers or just to use it to align yourself with your chart ruler. I have many clients that have used it for many different things, and so we can figure out what you're working on.
Awesome. And then, as
Yeah.
always, we love to hear from folks. So, like, do you work with
Yes.
progressions? Is this a new technique for you? If you have any
Yeah.
stories of ways that you've seen progressions show up in your life, we'd love to hear them. So, leave a
Yeah,
comment
we
down
love
below.
examples.
Reach out to us on Instagram. We'd love to hear
Yeah.
from you. All
Yeah.
right. Thanks, everyone.